his new role as a heroin trafficker, Ruggiero exhibited an uncharacteristic wariness. He not only had law enforcement to worry about, but was well aware that Paul Castellano had repeatedly declared, "You deal in drugs, you die." He brought in an ex-New York City cop to sweep his home for possible taps and bugs. As soon as Gambino's squad agents learned this, the microphone was turned off. 2 days later, it was activated again, and the former cop was overheard telling Ruggiero, "Ange, the good news is the house is clean. The bad news is your phone's tapped." Ruggiero could barely contain his relief. "I figured that," he gushed. I know it. Thank God I watched myself on that fucking phone." Mao allowed himself a small smile. Giving up the wiretap was not much of a sacrifice. The bug was what counted. Eventually, it would provide probable cause to place a bug in Castellano's great house on the hill. At this juncture, Sammy the Bull was nowhere on Mao's radar screen. In Ruggiero's endless chit-chat about the family, he had never once mentioned Sammy. "At that time in 82-83, I was a million miles away from the Bergen crew," Sammy said. "I wasn't into drugs, into hijacking, heists, bookmaking. I was in construction." Based largely on evidence gathered from the microphone in Angelo Ruggiero's dinette, court authorization was obtained for a Title III bug to be placed in Castellano's Todd Hill residence. It was a daunting prospect. Not only was the mansion in a security-conscious neighborhood of million-dollar-plus homes, but it was protected by the most modern alarm system, monitored by a security company. Beyond this, there were closed-circuit cameras, window sensors, sophisticated locks, watchdogs, and floodlit grounds at night. Kallstrom's team spent weeks poring over various scenarios. Blueprints of the mansion were acquired. Informants solved the problem of where to place a bug. Big Paul usually conducted his mob business gatherings at a long table at one end of his vast kitchen. Finally, a decision was reached that the security obstacles were too great for a break-in. In addition, surveillance showed that there was hardly a predictable moment when someone living in a mansion wasn't there. A far more simple, direct approach, just as daring in its own way, was settled on. The bug was installed in broad daylight one afternoon in mid-March 1983, under the very eyes of Tommy Bellotti. The key was Castellano's television sets. Castellano's home TV reception began to suffer intermittent interruptions. In frustration, he had Bellotti arrange for a service call. On the day of the appointment, Castellano had to leave for a Wall Street lunch. He instructed Bellotti to shadow the serviceman everywhere he went. The serviceman was Jim Cantamesa. Down the street, in the guise of a telephone company worker, John Kravick had clamped his way up a pole. The two agents were connected by wireless radio. Bellotti showed Cantamesa all the sets in the mansion. None of them was working properly. At last they got to one in the kitchen. "Uh-huh," Cantamesa said. "See all those cobwebs there, sir? Yeah? They can screw up an electrical connection like you wouldn't believe." Bellotti appeared dumbstruck. "No shit. So what do you got to do?" Cantamesa explained that the first thing to do was to clean out the cobwebs, and next to examine the wiring in the immediate vicinity to ascertain whether it should be replaced. Producing wires with alligator clips, he said, "I can jump over the bed section here like this." Traffic on the pole immediately eliminated the TV signal interference. "Unbelievable," Bellotti said. "Fucking cobwebs. Who fucking knew?" Cantamesa was careful to ask Bellotti if he wanted him to take care of the problem, and Bellotti urged, Yeah, do what you gotta do." Once the bug was installed, transmissions from it were relayed to a listening post. Suddenly, Paul Castellano's voice was heard saying, "There any more of that pie left, Gloria?" Gloria was Gloria Olate, the Castellanos' live-in Colombian maid and Big Paul's mistress. Although Paul Castellano had run the most powerful Cosa Nostra family in the nation for 7 years, since 1976 he had remained practically unknown to the public at large and seemingly immune to prosecution. But now the layers of insulation he had enjoyed were beginning to fray. August 1983, 4 months after Big Paul's kitchen was bugged, the Gambino squad arrested Angelo Ruggiero, Gene Gotti, John Cornelia, and 8 other men associated with the Bergen crew for heroin racketeering. For the first time, it was revealed that much of the evidence was obtained via the bug in Ruggiero's Cedarhurst home. Since death was the family's position on drug dealing, the garrulous Ruggiero took the only option available to him. He sent messages denying everything. He even went so far as to say that if the FBI had tapes, it wasn't his voice on them. It was all a sham, a frame. He wasn't into drugs. Paul Castellano elected to proceed with some caution. This case involved the entire Bergen crew, with the notable exception so far of its acting capo, John Gotti. He could break John down to a soldier on the grounds that he had failed to control the crew, but there was Neil Della Croce to consider. Paul had accepted Neil as underboss simply to smooth over a potentially tense confrontation. He knew that Della Croce was immensely popular, and that not only was John Gotti extremely close to him, but Ruggiero was his nephew. Castellano was not, as Sammy said, an instinctive gangster. To back the Bergen crew into a corner was to invite civil war. It was the last thing that Castellano desired. And of course he had no idea that the electronic surveillance of Ruggiero had led to the bug in his own residence. Della Croce provided Paul with a face-saving way out. "Look," Neil told him, "sooner or later the government's got to turn over them tapes. Let's see what's on them." "I liked Angelo," Sammy said. "He had a lot of balls. Not too much in the brains department, but he seemed then like an upfront guy. He could make you laugh. So I kind of liked him. I didn't know till later that the bug on him gave the government the okay, the right legally, to bug Paul's house. It was Angie's big mouth. I mean, he's caught on tape all over the fucking place. And always talking about stuff that he ain't supposed to be even mentioning to nobody. We find out about the tapes on Angie when he was arrested. And they eventually become a major fucking problem. Ultimately, people would say these tapes and what was on them probably led to Paul's downfall. But what really led to it was a lot of things he was doing that people in the family were against. And when the time came, this was why me and other guys went along with it. Right then, though, Angie's tapes had nothing to do with me whatsoever. I was never at Angie's house. I'm not on any of his tapes. That was all Angie's problem, John Gotti's problem, and Paul's. Meanwhile, the tapes from the bug near Castellano's kitchen table kept rolling, slowly building court-admissible evidence that he was indeed the chairman and chief executive officer of a huge criminal enterprise. Singularly absent on any of the tapes that recorded the gatherings around Castellano's kitchen table was Neil Della Croce, nor was the voice of Sammy Gravano ever heard. Although Ma was unaware of it at the time, Castellano preferred to hash over the construction projects so dear to his heart during one-on-one meetings that did not take place at the kitchen table. Still, the constant physical surveillance finally landed Sammy on Ma's Gambino family chart. An unfamiliar car was noted, and a check of the plates showed it to be registered to a Deborah Gravano, married to Salvatore Gravano, a mid-member of Toto Arello's crew. Years ago, he had been acquitted in a double homicide case. He was currently embroiled in a tax evasion case. That was it. He didn't seem very important. Whenever the topic of construction came up in Castellano's kitchen, it concerned reported disputes between families. Which one was entitled to what on shared projects? Paul would promptly table the discussion for further review in what were called mini-commission meetings outside the mansion, which required the attendance of the bosses involved. Sammy was present at one of them, where he got his first close-up look at Vincent the Chin Gigante in action. Although Fat Tony Salerno was listed on FBI charts as the boss of the Genovese family, Gigante was the real power. Family members were under strict orders never to breathe his name in passing on his wishes. They were simply to point to their own chins when referring to him. He had achieved notoriety in the tabloids for wandering around neighborhood streets unwashed and unshaven, attired in pajamas, muttering incomprehensibly to himself. Time after time, psychiatrists, both his own and court-appointed, had persuaded judges that he was mentally unfit to stand trial. They called them mini-commission meetings, Sammy said, because they weren't really to talk about Cosa Nostra. It was to talk about the construction business. Paul loved them because in his heart, he was a businessman. The Chin was more of a gangster. He said that commission meetings should be just about family business, not the construction business or any other business. He said that a commission meeting is meant to take a life or to save a life, to prevent the war between one family and another, to set overall policy. It wasn't to resolve whether you should pay this guy $5,000. That was for the captains to decide, not the bosses. The Chin made some good points. I had to agree. He didn't sound so crazy to me. For Sammy, Castellano's efforts to find out what was on the Ruggiero tapes remained a matter that did not concern him. Still, other incidents were causing him to take a second look at the family boss. It was as if Castellano, beset by the unrest brewing in his own family, was seeking allies in other families. "We had this captain up in Connecticut," Sammy said. "I think his name was Frank Piccolo. The Genoese people hated him because he was their competition. They, Chin, come up with some concocted story about how he was a thorn in their side, a real pain in the ass. They want permission from Paul to kill him, and he gives it, and they do kill him. For being a pain in the ass? He was doing his job for our family. And Paul gave him up, the captain in our family, in 2 seconds, against every Cosa Nostra rule. It was a big disgrace for the family, a real black eye. That was a bad, bad move that Paul made. You want to know your boss is going to fight for you, but now you're not so sure anymore. Probably he thought it was a good move business-wise or racketeering-wise, but gangsters don't think like that." Worse yet, it became apparent that Big Paul was lining his pockets with proceeds that should have been shared with members of the Gambino family. He gave away the bread association, which was ours, to the Colombo family. I don't know what he got on that. And he started being real greedy with the concrete. So that's another big mistake Paul is making. We can see that he's not doing this for our family. He's doing it for his personal family, for his personal pocket. This is when the grumbling really starts with us. I don't know why Paul thought we would never talk to each other. John Gotti, who's got his own thing with Paul about Angie's tapes, picks this up, of course. At a pre-Christmas gathering at Todd Hill in 1984, Sammy arrived with the requisite envelope of money. He stayed for a short while and then said he had to leave. Paul asked him where he was going. "I want to stop by the Ravenite and pay my respects to Neil." "What are you going down there for?" "You're on my side." Sammy looked at Castellano and said, "What sides? I thought we were one family. Neil's our underboss." Across America, 1985 was not a vintage year for Cosa Nostra. Family bosses in Cleveland, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Kansas City were convicted and received lengthy sentences for conspiring to skim vast sums of cash from the Las Vegas casinos. The mob was through in the City of Dreams. The hierarchy of the Patriarca family, which operated out of Boston and Providence, was convicted on multiple RICO counts. An all-out federal assault was launched against the Philadelphia family, which would lead to life in prison for its violent boss, Nicky Scarfo. In New Orleans, the family had never recovered from the conviction, for trying to bribe a federal judge, of the previously untouchable Carlos Marcello. In Tampa, Buffalo, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, San Jose, the families were wobbling on their last legs. And in New York, the Manhattan U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani announced the ultimate RICO racketeering case against Cosa Nostra, charging that the commission itself was a criminal enterprise. All 5 local bosses or acting bosses would be indicted. Only Chin Gigante escaped unscathed. Gigante had never been caught on tape. No one in the family had incriminated him by name on tape, and prosecutors also faced the uninviting prospect of trying to prove that he possessed the mental competence to stand trial. The bail set for Castellano, who was described as a de facto head of the commission, was the highest for any of the defendants, $4 million. After a night in jail, he had no trouble meeting it. Now Paul learned that his home had been bugged, and that the Ruggiero tapes were the legal basis for it. "Give me those tapes," Big Paul demanded of Della Croce in June 1985. Transcripts weren't good enough. It was an article of faith among wise guys that at worst the government doctored them and at best made transcribing errors. But the dynamics of the play had dramatically changed. Della Croce was terminally ill with inoperable cancer. His scheduled hospital stays allowed Kallström's team to place a bug in his Staten Island home that recorded the conversations. Della Croce tried to placate Big Paul, saying that there were many personally embarrassing moments on the tapes that Angie did not want anyone to hear. "Tell him," Castellano snapped back, "not to worry about that. I don't want these tapes to get the proof I need to kill him. I want these tapes because it's part of my case." He said his lawyers were trying to suppress the introduction of his own tapes in the commission trial. That was why he had to have them. "Let me talk to him," Della Croce said. Ruggiero remained adamant about not giving up the tapes. He accused his uncle of betrayal for even entertaining the thought. He told his lawyers he would kill them if they gave up the tapes. Listening to this, Maug could appreciate Ruggiero's dilemma. He was truly between a rock and a hard place. Besides narcotics trafficking, Ruggiero had prattled on about commission meetings to one of his heroin dealers. If that ever got out, nothing could save him. One day in late September 1985, Robert DiBernardo brought a message to Sammy. Could he go to Queens? Angelo and John would like to see him. "So I went," Sammy said. "But only Angie was there." He said, "Sammy, I'm making a move on Paul. Are you with me?" I remember him hitting himself on the chest and saying, "I'm gonna blow this fucking motherfucker away." I'm listening. Then I said, "Angie, let me ask you a couple of questions. Where's John?" "He's with me, Sammy. But he thought it was best for me and you to talk first." So already John was playing the big shot. I said, "Where's Frank DeChico on this?" "We're going to get to Frankie, and Frankie's going to be with us. You'll see." "So right this minute, Frankie don't know what you're telling me?" "No." I said, "Angie, I'm not going to tell you what my position is, but I'm going to see Frankie myself and tell him about this meeting we're having. You got any problem with that?" No, go ahead and tell him." "Come on, Sammy. I love you and Frankie. I need you. You know I'm dead without you." I went over to Frankie's house. "I knew Frank from way back from around Bensonhurst," Sammy said. "Everybody respected him, so did I. It wasn't any one thing. We just gradually got tighter and tighter over time, especially after I was made. I can't even remember Frank lying to me once or giving me bad advice. I said, 'Frankie, come on out. Let's take a walk. I gotta have a long talk with you.' And I told him what's going on, what Angie said. 'All right, Sammy, what do you think?' he said. 'Frankie, what do I think? That's why I'm here. What do you think? What do we think together? I mean, as boss, Paul's selling the family out.' Both Sammy and DeChico were acutely aware that what was being suggested was practically unheard of. There hadn't been an unsanctioned hit on a family boss in New York since Vito Genovese's botched murder attempt against Frank Costello nearly 30 years ago. I said, 'I guess the point is, should we let John and Angie fight it out with Paul? Should we stay on the sidelines, just sit back, or should we join in?' We bounced everything off each other for 2 or 3 hours, and we concluded that we're not laid-back guys. We were really going to oppose this, or we're going to approve it. And if we approve it, we would join in. Then Frankie said, 'Neil's not long for this world, and Paul may go up on these cases he has. If he does, the word is he's making Tommy Gambino the acting boss and Tommy Bellotti the underboss.' I had heard some of this already, and it made me sick. Tommy Gambino is a fucking dressmaker, and Tommy Bellotti is a fucking abusive gorilla. We're going to have to answer to them? They They're going to run our family? We keep talking. Finally, we decide we'll back the move. Be part of it. Then I told Frankie, the only thing I want is that you become the boss after this is over. And that's when Frankie said, John's fucking ego is too big. If we can control him to stop the gambling, he could be a good boss. Sammy, I'll tell you what. We'll give him a shot. Let him be the boss. If it don't work out within a year, me and you, we'll kill him. I said, Frankie, if that's the way you feel, that's good enough for me, and we shook hands on it. The next day, we sent for Angie to come to Frankie's club. We told him, we're with you. We need a series of meetings, and when you come down again, come with John. He's no big shot here. John is at the next meeting. We decided when we take down Paul, we got to take out Tommy Bellotti. They must go together. Everybody agrees to that 100%. That autumn, Castellano's lawyer, James La Rosa, at last obtained the Ruggiero tapes on behalf of his client. Upon learning this, Mal couldn't help thinking that with Della Croce on the verge of death, it was kill or be killed for John Gotti. There were more meetings. We had to think ahead, Sammy said. Okay, after Paul and Tommy go down, what happens? I mean, this is some massive guy we're taking out with massive connections. And we're breaking the golden rule. We could be looking at a war that could take 8-10 years. On December 2nd, Neil Della Croce died. And the plotters received an unexpected bonus. Paul Castellano did not attend either his wake or his funeral. Shock reverberated through the Gambino family at this stunning breach of respect. Castellano explained he couldn't afford the bad publicity. No one bought this. Holed up in his mansion, he appeared to have no conception of the contempt he was being held in. Sammy said, we talked about sending a crew right into Paul's house. We don't mind killing the maid if she was there, after all the heartache she caused Paul's wife. But what if his family was there? We would never kill his wife, his daughter, any of the kids around. We're ripping our hair out how to put this together properly. The Chico reported that Castellano had sent him a message to be at a meeting. The Chico did not know what the meeting was about. Frankie said it was set for around 5 o'clock, December 16th, at a steak joint down in the city called Sparks. The more we thought about it, the better it looked, Sammy said. We concluded that 9 days before Christmas, around 5 to 6 o'clock at night, in the middle of Manhattan, there'd be thousands of people on the street hurrying this way and that. The hit would take only a few seconds, and the confusion would be in our favor. Nobody would be expecting anything like this, least of all Paul. And being able to disappear afterwards in the crowds would be in our favor. So we decide this is when and where it's going to happen. The day before, we have a meeting in my office. John comes down with Angelo and the entire hit team. Altogether, there are 11 of us. There are the 4 shooters, all from John's crew. They'll be waiting for Paul at the front door to Sparks. Sparks is on East 46th Street. John just says to everybody that there's going to be 2 guys killed. He says he ain't saying who they are yet, but it's a huge hit. John tells them that no matter what, don't run, even if there are cops around. These 2 guys have got to go. Don't worry about the cops, he says, because if you run and these guys ain't dead, we'll kill you. The following afternoon, everyone except the Chico gathered in a park on Manhattan's Lower East Side. Frankie would be inside Sparks, making sure that all the people there for the meeting with Paul don't do anything. Joe Watts drove me to the park. The shooters were there. The 4 of them wore long white trench coats and black fur Russian hats. You couldn't tell one guy from the other. I don't know whose idea that was, I guess John's, but I thought it was brilliant. The big thing would be confusing the witnesses. Well, what did they look like? I don't know, they all looked alike. And these would be people who don't even know what was going on. All they would remember were the outfits. Walkie-talkies were handed out so we could communicate with one another. Then John told everybody that it was Paul and Tommy Bellotti who were going. We went over what everybody's position would be. I left the park with John in a Lincoln. Our minds were on what was going to happen. John pulled the Lincoln in on the northwest corner of 3rd Avenue and 46th Street. People were swarming all around. I could see the canopy that said Sparks. The shooters in their white coats were already waiting by it. Another Lincoln came up next to us and stopped for a light. When I looked into it, I saw Tommy Bellotti and Paul. They were talking to each other. I got on the walkie-talkie and warned the guys outside of Sparks. The light changed and Tommy pulled up in front of Sparks. I didn't see Paul getting out, only the white coats moving towards the Lincoln. But I saw Tommy get out from the driver's side. All of a sudden he was squatting down, like he was seeing something, which was Paul getting shot. And then I saw a white coat come up behind Tommy, and Tommy went down. The white coat was bending over him. I looked to see if any of the people on the street was doing anything. They weren't. John slowly drove across 3rd Avenue into the block where Sparks was. I looked down at Tommy Bellotti laying on a huge puddle of blood in the street, and I said to John, "He's gone." I couldn't see Paul. John picked up speed, and we headed back to Brooklyn. We had the radio on. We heard the report that there was a shooting in Midtown Manhattan, and next that one of the victims was the reputed mob boss, Paul Castellano. But I was in such a haze that I don't remember anything else about that ride. I don't know who shot who, you don't ask. I only heard later from John that one of the shooters didn't get a shot off. His gun jammed. Everything else went according to plan. It was like they say, elementary, my dear Watson. We made an agreement that nobody involved in this from here on out would ever speak to each other about it and wouldn't admit anything to anybody else in our family or in any of the other families. The manner and place of Castellano's death catapulted him to the sort of coverage reserved for the assassination of a head of state. Not only did the tabloids go all out, Big Paul, chauffeur, take their last ride, but the New York Times featured it on the front page 2 days running. Castellano and Bellotti were each reported to have been shot 6 times, each also the recipient of a coup de grace to the head. The city's police commissioner said that according to witnesses, it was uncertain whether 2 or 3 men had carried out the gangland executions. No one remembered seeing 4. What eyewitnesses most recalled was that the assassins were wearing identical Russian fur caps and long coats. They were then seen fleeing on foot towards 2nd Avenue. The head of the state's organized crime task force declared that Castellano's violent death would have required the formal approval of the bosses of the other 4 families in the city. Long knew better, but he wasn't available for interviews. Sammy owned a quarter interest in Caesar's East, a restaurant on 58th Street off 3rd Avenue. "We had to have a meeting of the captains in the family," Sammy said. "It was a couple of days after Paul went down. All the captains met downstairs. The only ones down there who wasn't a captain was Angelo and me. We had guns. You could say we were there for intimidating purposes." Joe Gallo was at the head of the table. Frankie and John were on each side of him. He was our consigliere. With Paul gone and Neil being dead, he was now in official control of the family. He was an old-timer, and he was playing this game with the captains. He knew what to say. He knew the ins and outs of Cosa Nostra. He told them that we had no idea who killed Paul. He said he was going to use Frankie and John to help him run the family and to investigate what happened. A couple of weeks later, all the captains were called in again. Joe Gallo reiterates that we're still investigating, but the time had come to put our family together and vote for a new boss. Everybody had got the drift by now. It's all over the newspapers that John Gotti did the hit. Between themselves, Frankie and John have agreed that John will be the boss and Frankie the underboss. At the meeting, Frankie gets up and votes for John Gotti. It zips right around the room. Nobody opposes. It's unanimous. At that point, John announces that Frankie will be his underboss and that Joe Gallo will stay on as consigliere. He says he's making Angie Ruggiero the captain of his old crew. Now I'm going to be made an official captain too. Toto asks official permission to step down. They give it, and that same night they make me a capo. We got recognition from every family, including the Genovese family. Except the Genovese people said that this situation with Paul had to be put to rest and someday somebody would have to answer for that if and when the commission ever got together again. We said, don't worry. As soon as we find out, we will retaliate. Until then, we're just going to run our family. The day after Paul Castellano and Tommy Bellotti were shot, Mao dispatched agents on the Gambino squad to check on high-profile family members. Two agents, Frank Sparrow and Matty Tricorico, were assigned to Frank DeChico. Sparrow and Tricorico had been on the squad since its inception. Their responsibility was to keep tabs on Staten Island residents in the family, which included DeChico. They headed for DeChico's social club on Bath Avenue in Bensonhurst. On a street corner near the club, they spotted DeChico, and were not surprised to observe him in animated conversation with Jimmy Brown, Robert Di Bernardo, and Angelo Ruggiero. What did surprise them was the presence of Sammy Gravano, and clearly Sammy was not merely an acolyte. While they knew Sammy by sight, he had attracted no particular investigative interest. Now he appeared to be a major player. For the first time, Sammy made Mao's A-list, but for the public at large, he was as anonymous as ever. Not so John Gotti. As recently as 1984, Gotti, the would-be mob boss, retained many of the characteristics of a street thug. After the Castellano hit, Gotti dramatically refined his act. Because of the sensational nature of Castellano's execution, he became the immediate object of intense press attention when law enforcement let it be known that he was the prime suspect behind the murder, the new, real-life Godfather. He rose to the occasion and dressed for it. He looked the way Americans wanted a gangster to look, with his diamond pinky ring, meticulously styled silvery hair, a healthy tan from regular sun lamp treatments, his wardrobe of $2,000 custom-made suits and $200 hand-painted ties. The tabloids were soon labeling him the Dapper Don. He reveled in his new celebrity. Always flashing a smile, he embraced TV cameras. He was ready with quotable quips. Sure, I'm the boss of the family. My wife and kids. There were breathless reports of how mobsters had lined up at a Christmas party to kiss him and pay homage. Before the year was out, Time magazine had featured Gotti on its cover, accompanied by the stock line Crime Boss in a painting by Andy Warhol. Till then, the only other gangster to have graced a Time cover a half-century before was Al Capone. Gotti himself had been indicted on RICO charges. The case had been developed by a young assistant U.S. attorney in Brooklyn named Diane Giacalone, who had grown up in Ozone Park. She had won a conviction against a gang of local armored car hijackers, who she learned had tried to curry favor with the Bergen crew by passing on part of the proceeds. When she believed she had gathered enough evidence to substantiate these tributes, she proceeded against Gotti and others. The Gambino squad was not happy. The case was too tenuous. Confident that Gotti's high-wire celebrity turn would do him in, it was looking forward to nailing him in a major and foolproof case. Then now learned that Giacalone was threatening to reveal that one of Gotti's co-defendants, Willie Boy Johnson, was a prized Gambino squad informant. She intended to use this as a club to force him to testify for her prosecution. The FBI attempted to dissuade Giacalone, but she remained obstinate. Finally, the Bureau stepped out of the case completely, citing administrative and procedural differences. Johnson pleaded with Giacalone to reconsider. "I will be killed," he said. "My family will be slaughtered." At a pretrial court hearing, despite vehemently denying he had been an informer, he was placed in protective custody in a federal detention facility in New York, the Metropolitan Correctional Center. Giacalone then made a second move that garnered big headlines. She requested that Gotti be denied bail and jailed so that he couldn't tamper with her witnesses. The judge agreed, and on May 19th, Gotti wound up in the Metropolitan Correctional Center with Johnson. Sammy said, "John told Willie Boy, you did a bad thing for all them years, but I'll forgive you. Nothing will happen to you." Willie Boy asked John to swear on his dead son's head, And John did. And Willie Boy never did testify. John totally conned Willie Boy. I don't know how he felt for this, but he did. After jury selection, Diane Giacalone's prosecution began in September 1986. Because of Gotti, the trial took on a carnival atmosphere. Spectators packed the courtroom every day. So did reporters. Television crews were a constant presence. Gotti's sartorial splendor received daily press attention. He was said to have instructed his co-defendants to appear in jackets and ties. He was heard to chastise one of them for unacceptable color coordination. His apparent coolness under fire was most commented on. "I'm not worried," he was quoted as jauntily saying. "They got no case. It's a frame. You'll see. I'll be walking out of here." Bruce Cutler, a hitherto minor figure in the criminal defense community, basked in Gotti's glory. He appeared to fawn over his client, aping his dress. Partway through the trial, all the bosses in the Cosa Nostra Commission case being tried in federal court in Manhattan were convicted. They would receive sentences of 100 years each. Asked by a reporter if this wasn't disheartening, Gotti said, "That's got nothing to do with me. I'll be home soon." The trial dragged on for nearly 7 months. The verdict, not guilty, was rendered after a week's deliberation on March 13, 1987. Gotti's supporters cheered. Cutler hugged Gotti and kissed him. Cutler was hailed as a defense genius. And in the headlines the next morning, Gotti had a new trademark sobriquet, the Teflon Don. Gotti had every reason to be nonchalant throughout the trial, and Bruce Cutler wasn't quite the genius he was cracked up to be. Sammy had fixed a juror, and not just any juror, but the jury foreman. The price was $120,000. Ever the negotiator, Sammy whittled it down to $60,000, payable in installments. You never knew, he figured. The guy could get sick or something. In the months after John Gotti's acquittal in the Giacalone prosecution, the Bergen Club in remote Ozone Park was not quite what he had in mind to go with his new celebrity status. He wanted the sizzle of Manhattan, so he decided to hold court at Neil Della Croce's old club, the Ravenite, in Little Italy. He would arrive around 5 o'clock each evening in a gleaming, chauffeured Mercedes in suitable pomp and circumstance. Maid members and associates would be lined up outside to greet him with hugs and kisses. Walkers crowded the opposite side of Mulberry Street to catch a glimpse of the great man, who would flash a smile and respond with a thumbs-up wave. Then Agents Sparrow and Tricorico, in their periodic monitoring of Sammy, saw that he was now going to the Ravenite every night. Sammy had been appointed acting consigliere. He was now part of the Gambino family administration. It was ridiculous how the guys, made guys, out front of the Ravenite were acting, Sammy said. It was like they thought they were in some movie or something. Well, I wasn't in movies. Any kissing, that kind of stuff I had to do, I did inside the club. One night I did go with him to Regine's. He had his regular 8-10 guys with him. It had to be the best champagne. Not Dom Perignon, the other one. Crystal Rosé. The more expensive, the better. A couple of girls were looking at him, and he sent the guy over to talk to them. "Would you like to have a drink with John Gotti?" "Fuck that shit." And there was, "Oh, look, there's so-and-so, the big movie star. Who gave a fuck about them?" That wasn't me, to go somewhere just to be seen. We're not actors. We're not actresses. We're gangsters, racketeers. We're not supposed to be known to the public. What happened to that prick in the finger when Paul said we're a secret society? What kind of secret is this? I'll say one thing for John. With his big ego, he did believe in himself. All over the country, Cosa Nostra families are on the run. All the old bosses have been put away for 100 years. And the feds aren't hammering just on our family, it's the other families too. A lot of people are saying the whole thing is falling apart. It was unbelievable. And you gotta give Rudy Giuliani credit when he was the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan. He showed them how to work this fucking RICO. The witness protection program became stronger. These things that the government implemented years before were starting to hit us in the ass now. But John wasn't fazed. He told me he's going to change the face of Cosa Nostra. Show everybody how to win cases. He's going to show them how to do it, how to beat the government. Toward this end, in 1988, Gotti desired a formal meeting of the Cosa Nostra Commission. It was the first and last that Sammy would attend. He helped set it up with the underboss of the Genovese family, Benny Eggs Mangano, and the Lucchese consigliere, Gaspipe Casso. On the street, John and myself met Vic Amuso, who was running the Lucchese family, and Gaspipe. Our captain led us to an underground garage to the elevators. As we were walking, Gaspipe said, "What a great place for a hit." Jim comes into the apartment with Benny Eggs. He's in his bathrobe and pajamas. He has a 4 or 5 day growth of beard. He looked real grubby. We resolved certain issues. One thing I'll never forget from that meeting was John telling Chin in a proud way that his son, John Jr., had just been made. Instead of congratulating him, Chin said, "Geez, I'm sorry to hear that." We were a little shocked by this. But Chin was right. Paul Castellano didn't want his kids in the life. None of Chin's sons were made. I myself would be dead set against it. I wanted my son to be legitimate. So here was Chin, who's supposed to be crazy, saying who in their right mind wanted their son to be made? And there was John boasting about it. Who was really crazy?